So there's a phrase in Washington, D.C. that's termed taxation without representation, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've probably heard it, right?
Yep.
And I made the mistake of saying that phrase to her once. That didn't go well, so I won't say that again. But the idea is I provide, I shuttle, I have a more flexible job, so I can take kids to appointments more frequently. So I do all of the like dutiful things that I'm asked to do or that I see need to be done. And I have no say in what goes on in the household. I have no say about screen time, even though their moody grumpiness that happens with any kid that stares at a screen for 8 hours on a summer day. I deal with the consequences of that. And you might just say, dude, you're in middle age, suck it up. And if that's what I need to do, I will work harder on that. But it's that whole idea, like I do all these things and then I just have no say in how things are operated in the household. And I'm just not used to that.
Welcome to Step Parentville.
Yeah, that sucks.
You're listening to the Nacho Kids podcast, where we discuss all things step family related. Real stories, real people, real help. Your hosts are the creators of the Nacho Kids Method and the Nacho Kids Academy Step Family Coaching Team, Lori and David Sims.
Welcome to episode 265 of the Nacho Kids podcast.
What's going on, folks?
What's going on with you, David?
I am down here at Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
Dirty Myrtle.
Not enjoying the waves or anything else. I'm stuck inside of a hotel room preparing for a conference presentation tomorrow.
Poor David.
Yeah, I mean, that happens to me all the time. I go to these conferences at all these places and people are like, oh man, I love such and such a town. Did you go to No, I will go. And I went to the conference and I came back. See it.
Well, I do want to say that we are wrapping up our guided boot camp challenge next week.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited. It's been going very well. I had a lot of positive feedback.
Yeah. Yeah. We put a lot of time and energy into that.
And we will do the Nacho Boot Camp Challenge again in August.
Oh, cool. And I think you wanted to do another guided challenge as well, didn't you?
Yes, we are going to do the Change Your Stinking Thinking Challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to come out in September.
Cool. There you go. So you got all this stuff coming out right before the last quarter of the year, which ushers in all the holiday seasons and craziness of that. So that'd be a great time to get prepared for all the challenges that will come from the holidays.
All right. Our guest today is a stepdad and a bio dad.
Oh, cool.
Yes. He's been blending about 2 years. His kids are adults and no longer living in the home.
Mm-hmm.
His stepkids are still in the home.
No, that is.
So his kids are grown and flown, or flown and grown, whatever it is.
Grown and gone?
Grown and gone. And his stepkids are still in the house. And he feels like he's already raised his kids.
Okay.
And now the stepkids are in the house. It can be a challenge.
So he's like, oh, I'm not done after all.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I remember when you and I got married, going through the thought process of Jackson's 5 years younger than my kids, which means when I'm quote unquote done, I just added 5 more years onto this.
Yeah, that's true. His youngest stepkid would be gone in about 4 or 5 years. He talks about his wife not having a consequence-based parenting style.
Yeah, anytime you talk about differences in parenting styles, which is very common, but it's also very frustrating.
Well, he was raised like you and I were.
Yeah, you had to put the phone book in your back of your pants.
Yep, in your britches. And one thing he said to me, David, and I really like this, because I told him, I said, you're not the parent, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're the husband, but not the parent. And he said, I don't understand being a husband without being a parent.
Okay.
Because his wife, his first wife, they were together till his kids hit, I think, senior in high school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can see how, when you become a parent, especially for so many years, obviously, for a long time, it can be very difficult to understand that your role has changed, and some people don't even want it to change.
Right. Or how to separate the two.
Right.
Right.
Me being married and me being a parent are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I can see where he's having some tough issues with that.
Yep. But that's all I'm going to tell y'all. Y'all need to get listening.
All right, then let's do it.
Today we have stepdad and bio dad Sean. Hey, Sean, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Tell us a little bit about your blend.
Yeah. So I have 4 kids, 4 bio kids of my own that are all adulting. They're all in their 20s. I'm even a granddad, which is really cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's the best part of having kids, I think. Anyway, and then about just over 2 years ago, my wife and I got married. She has 3 awesome boys. My bio kids are 2 boys, 2 girls, and my stepkids are 3 boys, and they're all in middle school and high school.
So when you got married, your kids were how old?
My kids were, when we got married, my youngest was 20, I think.
Were they all out of the house?
They were all out of the house. We didn't do any kid blending at all. I mean, they have interacted and stuff. It's been fantastic. My boys like to ski. My step boys like to ski. So there have been some really awesome connection points there that have been fun, but never in the same household.
When you met your now wife and she had kids that were younger, were you concerned about that at all?
Not really. I've served in coaching capacities for many, many years. Like most parents won't say this, but the teen years to me are actually my favorite years.
Oh, goodness.
I know, right? But there's just things you can do with them and that are fun. And so I looked forward to it with great anticipation, not blindly. I mean, gosh, I feel like we've read every book and listened to every podcast known to man about how to prepare for this, knowing eyes wide open that blending is very, very difficult and often not successful. So I feel like we did a lot of work ahead of time to prepare ourselves for what that might look like, knowing that we wouldn't really have the challenge of blending kids, which at some level makes it easier.
Yes.
But we worked really hard up front to sort of try and figure that out. And of course, you never really know until you get into it. So here we are.
And how often do you have your stepkids?
Yeah, so we have them most of the time. They're with their dad who lives locally, and they're with him during the school week. It's one night, or during the school year, it's 1 week a night, and then every other weekend. And then in the summer, it's still every other weekend. But then they're, instead of coming home that night, Wednesday night or whatever night it is, they spend the night and come home the next day. So that's the arrangement.
So basically every other weekend and one day during the week.
Yeah, and as they drive and things like that, and have a little bit more mobility, we find them over at our house maybe a little more frequently, which is fine. It's good to have them home.
It doesn't bother you?
No, I would say at times it makes me concerned a little bit for their dad. I'm a dad who lives hundreds and hundreds of miles away from my kids, and even though they're adults, they live close to their bio mom, so they see their bio mom a lot, and I don't see them a lot. And so I know how that feels, and can only imagine what that would feel like when they live 10 miles away, how that might cause concern. I also wondered if that might cause us custody problems, but it hasn't. So far, so good that way. We don't mind having them home. I will say when we were dating, they didn't have their driver's license. So their mobility was not very good. So once they were with their dads, they were with their dads. And so we had some more reliable and predictable time alone, which has become more difficult. I wouldn't say that's a huge issue.
Right. But it's just when you're not expecting someone to be there.
Yeah. Like you have something planned. And of course, like any mom, like when kids roll through the door, guess who gets the attention, right? That's not a critique.
Right.
That's just how biology works.
Right. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. They want to fight that. Oh, but I'm in their life more than their real bio parent, and I do everything for them. And they take offense to being reminded they aren't blood.
Yeah, I would say I don't take offense. I will say that at times it is difficult because as the stage of life I'm in where I've seen my kids fly the coop, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they're no longer in my day-to-day, face-to-face life. Sometimes it is a little challenging because I see, our youngest will be gone in 4 or 5 years. And so in the end, it's just going to be me and her, like it is with this is the same thing in a bio situation, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
you want to work on that relationship while still making sure that particularly the bio parent continues to foster and maintain the relationship with their bio kids. And so it's a juggling act. I would not say that's been a particularly difficult aspect of our relationship.
Yeah, it is a juggling act. And that's a good way to phrase that, because if you have bio kids, you're trying to make sure you focus on them enough. You want to make sure you focus on your relationship with your partner enough. And you want to make sure that if you are focusing on the stepkids, that it's in a positive way.
Yeah, and I have work to do there.
So let's talk about that.
So one of the reasons I reached out to you in the first place was the situation I came from in my first marriage was my wife was a stay-at-home mom the entirety of, there was some volunteer work she did toward the end when the kids were in high school and didn't really care to ever see us that phase of their lives. But for the most part, she was a stay-at-home mom. My wife now has worked for 23 years full time and has a very, 7 to 5 intense job at a major company where she has an important role. And so she's very occupied. And one of the challenges that has created is I feel like I bring a lot to the table in terms of having been here, done that. Like I helped raise 4 kids, right? And one of the things, interestingly enough, that we didn't really come across in our podcasts and our book reading, you read all about how the step parent shouldn't do any of the disciplining, which totally agree that, focus on trying to be the yes guy, the Disney dad, whatever, right? And try and avoid that. But there wasn't a lot written on, there's only one thing I read in a book. I'm trying to remember, I think his name is Ron Deal, who I think is most described as some level of expert on the topic, certainly written enough books about it. And they talked about while the step parent should not be involved in the discipline, sort of they do have a role theoretically in forming what the house looks like, whether that's the rules or how we engage with one another, generally behind closed doors. And then bio parent steps in and sort of executes, and step parent backs up and supports, right? That's the model I'm somewhat familiar with. And where the struggle we've had is there's been very little interest on her part to accept input and feedback. And that does, you'd have to know me to not be surprised by this, but that doesn't stop me from providing it. And because my position is, for example, if, again, I grew up with 2 boys and 2 girls. So farting and burping and talking about body parts at the dinner table that never happened. Right. That just never happened. And I learned very quickly, even before we actually tied the knot, that is sort of par for the course. And while she'll make a good effort to say, hey, please stop that, there just generally aren't, it's not a consequence-based parenting style. And that is different than what I was raised in and what I did as a bio father. And my position has been, hey, I live in this house. Those things sort of affect me. Like, I feel like I should have some say. I don't want to be the executioner, but I feel like I should have some say. And that just in practice hasn't gone very well. And so when I think about, the things we argue about, it's really singular. It's parenting. And we're struggling with that a lot. And that's sort of why I approach you. Like, I generally turn to myself and say, what am I getting wrong here? Right. Before I start blaming other people. So I don't know. It's something we're really hung up on.
Well, what you're getting quote, quote, wrong, we will say, is you're expecting her to parent like you did with your kids.
Yeah, that's fair.
And more than likely, when you tell her how you feel she should parent, what she hears is, you're a crappy parent. You're doing this wrong. I've got more experience than you. I know what I'm talking about. You're stupid, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's what she's told me she's felt.
And if you say anything that can come across as negative about her kids, she's going to get so defensive.
Yep.
And the good thing about this is your kids were older, so they weren't in the house. So it's harder for her to play tit for tat. So if you say something about her kids, she can't really bring something up about your kids as easily as if they lived in the same home.
No, that's fair. And some of the podcasts I've listened of yours and others, it's that you get this competitive, and you walk away like everyone thinks everyone's kids suck.
Right.
And that's very destructive. So yeah, that is the good news about not having my kids in the house.
Right. So while you have the best of intentions, your input's not wanted or needed. And it doesn't mean that she loves you less or looks at you as less important in her kids' lives or anything like that. It's just she's the mom and she gets to decide how to parent these kids. And you're only 2 years in the marriage part.
Yeah.
Did y'all live together before that?
No.
So year 2 to 3 is the hardest part in a blend. If you look back, I bet maybe your first year wasn't so bad. But then you started feeling like you had the authority to share your opinions about her parenting. And we're not saying her parenting is perfect by any means. But she gets to choose how to do that. And I understand 100% some of this stuff does affect you. David has 4 sons. I have 1. I laughed when you were talking about the burping and the farting at the table and the inappropriate conversations about body parts. That is a boy family.
Yeah.
I grew up with 2 sisters. Jackson's girlfriend, the first time she ate dinner with us, she about had a heart attack. Her face turned blood red. And it wasn't something inappropriate. I guess that was the wrong word to use, but not normal for you
Right.
kind of discussion. And it's not that it's not that you're a bad person because you feel this way. You're wanting to help. You're wanting what's best for these kids. You feel like sometimes that what she's doing could be done better from your experience, but it's causing a problem between y'all. And you had said that parenting is pretty much what y'all argue about.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. There's always little things here and there, but those aren't problems in our marriage. This is a problem in our marriage. And
Right.
it will likely destroy it if it continues.
Correct. 100%. What you need to do, well, first of all, I want to go back to something. You were talking about Ron Deal.
Yeah.
Ron Deal has a buttload of experience in working with blended families. He doesn't have personal experience in blended families, which sometimes I see in his work.
It's a blind spot.
And it is. And that's a good way to put it. So the way that he phrased, or the way that you phrased what he said, I disagree with that to an extent, because you do have a role in that house, but that role is your partner's support system. That role is being a husband. That role isn't parenting her kids.
Yeah, this is tough to hear because I don't know being a husband without being a dad means. I don't understand the divisions or the boundaries or borders there. I mean, an example would be like, if she's busy and, let's just say, for example, one of the kids has really been misbehaving at school and gotten in trouble. There have been parent-teacher conferences, and this kid wants to go, we'll just say skiing, right? wants to miss school to go skiing. And I'm a big skier, and he and I ski together.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't surprise me to hear her say, yeah, he can go skiing. And I'd be like, what? Like, and then so is being the husband, the good husband, just taking the kid anyway? Or at what point do I say, well, I'm not comfortable taking a kid who's acting out, like, skiing with me. Sorry. Like, where does being the husband start and end? And where does being the stepfather start and end?
And that is a great question. So, for instance, with your skiing scenario and the grades, if you don't think the kids should go, I don't know how the scenario would necessarily work. Like, would you say, hey, I'm going skiing, and the kid go, hey, I want to go too? Is it planned ahead of time? And the reason I say that is because you don't have to invite the kid.
Yeah.
If you think that the kids shouldn't go because of their grades, don't invite them.
Yeah, a more realistic scenario would be, and I was trying to keep this as anonymous as possible, but it's still anonymous, is he really enjoys mountain biking in the summer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, as part of summer management, as all parents have to do, like, okay, what do we do with these kids who are bored 90% of the day, right? I've told him,
right,
I will take you once a week to the bike park, right? And that's sort of the boundary I've created. I'm not going to do the 3 or 4 times a week thing. I'm just not. And if she asks me, say, hey, Sean, I can't take him this time. Can you take him instead? And that's past my sort of 1-day boundary. Am I being a bad husband by not just sucking it up and taking him? I don't have any say in whether he goes.
No, not at all. You decided you would take him 1 day a week. You have no problems with that. That works for you, correct?
Yes.
Do you enjoy that time?
I don't like mountain biking, so I just sit in the car. I'll work or read a book or something like that. So I don't mind it. I enjoy the enjoyment he gets out of it.
And when you do take him that 1 day a week, where's your wife?
She's home working.
Okay. So do you feel like you're doing that for your stepson or for your wife?
Depends on the day.
Good answer. Good answer.
I mean, honestly, it depends on the day. And again, you're leading into something that has been a struggle for me, and I'm open to the idea. I'm thinking about this incorrectly. Is I often feel, so there's a phrase in Washington, D.C. that's termed taxation without representation, right? You've probably heard it, right?
Yep.
And I made the mistake of saying that phrase to her once. That didn't go well, so I won't say that again. But the idea is I provide, I shuttle, I have a more flexible job, so I can take kids to appointments more frequently. So I do all of the dutiful things that I'm asked to do or that I see need to be done. And I have no say in what goes on in the household. I have no say about screen time, even though their moody grumpiness that happens with any kid that stares at a screen for 8 hours on a summer day. I deal with the consequences of that. And you might just say, dude, you're in middle age, suck it up. And if that's what I need to do, I will work harder on that. But it's that whole idea, I do all these things and then I just have no say in how things are operated in the household. And I'm just not used to that.
Welcome to Step Parentville.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah. And it's not everything you're saying. It's just, it hits home with everybody listening to this. I know it does. So you're doing this, taking the step kid to the bike park. You had agreed to do him once a week. If you tell your partner, sure, I'll take him again, you broke your boundary or you loosened your boundary.
Mm-hmm.
Now that boundary has some flexibility in it. And your wife's going to remember that. And the next thing you know, the next week she's going to ask you. Because you did it before.
Yeah.
You have to stick to your boundaries. Number one, because they are your boundaries. And there's a reason you set those. Number two, you can't expect somebody to respect your boundaries when you change them constantly.
Yeah.
I understand 100% what you're saying about the taxation without representation. And it does feel that way sometimes. But I want to tell you, what you're going through now is not how it's always going to be. David and I were on the verge of divorce, and I am not kidding. We were one phone call away to an attorney from getting divorced. And I had to learn to Nacho because I was like you. I wanted to do things. I felt that was kind of my job. But at the same time, David also thought that's how things were supposed to be because of all the books we had read. You know, you can be a nuclear family. And he felt like he was plucking his ex out and putting me in. But it doesn't work that way. So I replaced the wife role. I didn't replace the mom role. So you've replaced the husband role, but not the dad role. And it's not a matter of just sucking it up because you've got to work through this. You need to work on identifying what your triggers are. What things with these kids or with the housing situation do you feel like cause you the most stress? Where can you put those things back on somebody else?
Who would that be? Who would that somebody else be?
Your wife.
Yeah.
And you may feel like this too, that you feel like, oh my God, I have no control. Like you were saying that you feel like you're doing all this stuff, but you don't have any say. You don't have any control over anything in your life but yourself. You can't make her parent like you think she should. But oftentimes, by you stepping back and not saying things, will help her to see those things her kids are doing. Because right now, when something happens and you say something, you're moving the target from what the kids were doing wrong or what you thought they were doing wrong to yourself and how you're responding to the situation.
Rather than letting her sit in the silence of action or inaction.
Correct.
Okay.
And what age were your bio kids when you and your ex split up?
My daughter, we split up when my daughter was a senior in high school. She started her senior year. My youngest.
Okay. So your kids were older.
Yeah, they were. I think it's called a gray divorce.
Never heard that.
Oh yeah, it's actually a book. It's actually pretty good. So it's when parents get a divorce and their kids are adults.
Okay. Hey, my mom and dad did that. You and your ex-wife raised your kids together up until that time.
Yes.
And she's not having that experience. It's easier for you to think how she should parent since you raised your kids in a nuclear home until they were in high school. It's kind of like a childless or child-free step parent. They feel like they can see things from the standpoint of I love them like my own, but that's because they don't have their own.
Right.
They haven't experienced it. So your experience with raising your kids and your wife's experience with raising her kids now is completely different. You didn't have an ex to deal with.
Yeah, that's fair. And another, I don't know if it's complicated or not, the intervening factor is her husband was largely absentee from parenting, even when they were married for whatever, 11 years it was. And she'd been divorced for 6, I think, when we met.
Mm-hmm.
So she is used to doing it on her own. She's also used to picking her battles because when you work full time and you're parenting alone, that's what you have to do. And I did not parent in that environment.
Right.
So I think I'm finding some mercy in my heart for her.
And I'm glad. She needs that. Because it's not easy. And also, with your kids being older, when you split up, you probably don't have guilty parent syndrome. And if you do, it's not to the same extent that she may have it.
Oh, she has it, and for the most part, I don't. Yeah. I mean, my guilty parent syndrome comes around Thanksgiving and Christmas when my kids can't spend the holidays together with their bio parents. But for the rest of the year, not so much.
And you can understand why she has guilty parent syndrome, right?
Well, yeah, because first of all, she's a mom. And second of all, because she's a divorced mom who is remarried and, has a lot on her plate.
And a lot of times, too, I want to point out that guilty parent syndrome may come from other areas. Some of my guilty parent syndrome comes from how I was raised as a child. I don't want to raise my son like I was raised.
Right.
So you're not a bad person. Have you tried to discipline the kids?
Occasionally. It's usually in just an absolute direct violation of a rule, or more commonly in support of their mother. And, your mother said, do this, do it.
Right.
That's the most common, but occasionally I will take their cell phones away from them if there's been some sort of blatant violation of what the rule that has been established by their mother. But that's infrequent.
And in those times, has she backed you up?
Not really. It hasn't necessarily gone poorly, but she has not. I'm trying to remember the term. Like, there's this term that some use where, as a stepdad, you're sort of like the babysitter, and you don't get to make the rules. But when the babysitter's there, they're there to enforce the rules of the parents while the parents are gone.
Right.
What that requires, though, is the parents have either formally or informally abdicated that responsibility or given that responsibility or authority to the babysitter. I would not say that has happened here.
So one of the courses that we have in the academy is the house rules and consequences. The house rules and consequences, you sit down and you make a list. They make a list. You compare the list. What's the common ones? Those are your rules. Okay, then you've got the consequences.
Who makes the list? The two parents or the parents and the kids?
The two parents.
Okay.
But the bio parent is responsible for explaining these house rules to their bio kids. And they are to be explained as house rules. So when your wife gets ready to leave, she can say, hey, y'all, I've got to go here for a little bit. While I'm gone, remember these house rules, because I'm going to ask Sean to let me know if y'all don't follow these rules.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan. I mean, she has a business trip coming up for the first time since we've been married where she will be gone and I will be at home.
For how long?
5 days. Feels like a lot.
Yeah. Is that trip soon?
In 2 weeks.
Oh, we got to work with you quick. Oh, goodness, Sean. All right. When y'all make these rules, because you're going to have you need some kind of plan before she goes out of town.
Yeah.
So I would suggest that you write down a few things that we don't have time to do this the way I need to do it. So, okay, you need to write down the things, top 5 things that you think are going to be problems with the kids when she's gone.
Okay.
If it's not doing their chores, who's assigning the chores?
Is that a question or something I need to write down?
Well, do they have chores?
That's another source of contention. They have yard chores in the summer. They mow the lawn and.
Okay. If possible, that needs to be taken care of before she goes. That way you don't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
If one of the things is the kids not picking their plates up after supper and putting them in the sink or doing the dishes, whatever it may be, what do you see as situations that can arise? And I know you can come up with more than 5 during that time while she's gone, because you need to know how she wants you to handle those.
Yeah.
Yes, we normally say when the bio parent's gone, you stay in babysitter mode, but 5 days is a little hard. And I don't know your wife's availability to contact the kids throughout the day while she's gone.
Be very, very limited.
But she can still do some.
She maybe text, but yeah.
Right. So she can still she can tell them, I'm going to text Sean and see how things are going. And I'm going to text y'all and see how things are going. But for instance, if one of the rules that if she comes up and says, oh yeah, okay, no. If you come up and say, well, if they do this, if Y, then X, right? If little Johnny calls me a butthole, then I'm taking his phone for an hour. She has to be 100% on board with that.
Yeah.
And really, she needs to be the one to come up with the consequences.
That's fair.
Because if you come up with them, she may agree with them at the time, but then guilty parent syndrome happens when the instance happens and they outweigh each other.
That happens a lot, by the way. I'll come
Yes.
up with a consequence. She's somewhere between 50 and 99% on board. And when push comes to shove, it doesn't go well.
Right. And something that you're going to have to focus on too, Sean, is focus on your relationship with her as your wife, not as a parent to her kids.
Well, that's what will endure the longest, right? But theoretically.
Right. And trust her to make the right decisions. And I know I've jumped around a lot with this because there's so much I want to tell you. And then when you told me that she's going in 2 weeks for 5 days, I just panicked. And it's like, I need to tell you about a month's worth of information before she goes.
Yeah.
When y'all were at the dinner table and kids start farting and that bothers you, get up and leave.
That's interesting you say that because that literally happened. We were visiting her parents in the Seattle area last week and we were out in public and that was going on. And I've told her in the past that while I can't control their behavior or enforce consequences around it, I can't have a boundary that I'm not going to have dinner in that environment.
Yes.
And so I very quietly, nonchalantly got up and left and went out and watched boats on the lake. And even that didn't go well.
Right, because she didn't like that.
No, she felt like I was ejecting, which I was.
Right.
But that's it's how I keep myself safe. It's how I keep myself from getting angry.
Right. There's nothing wrong with your boundary, but I'm proud of you for getting up and nonchalantly walking away and not going, I've told you before, if little Johnny keeps farting at the table while we're eating, I'm leaving.
No, I've done the make a scene departure before. That really didn't go well, understandably.
Right.
Yeah.
This isn't all on you, Sean. She's going to have to work with you on this too. She's going to have to understand that if you do walk away, that is okay. You didn't leave her there without a car. You didn't leave her there with the check with no money. You didn't say anything rude. You just got up and walked off. And some people could say that's rude, but when the alternative is for me to bash your kid or your parenting, that's not rude.
Yeah.
So for instance, when David's kids, when we had spaghetti, oh my gosh, just shoot me. It was horrible. The slurping, sauce slinging, it was crazy. I could not do it. And David he wanted us to have family dinners. That was one thing he was big on. Well, he quickly realized it was better if Lori didn't participate in family dinners with spaghetti. It's not going to be easy for you because you have a strong personality and you're wanting to be involved. And when she doesn't involve you in stuff, don't take it personal.
Yeah, that's a hard part. Would you say that's also true with financial decisions?
Financial decisions, whew, that's a big one. Do you have your finances together?
We do. That was a very conscious, well thought out. Doesn't mean it's going to end up being the right decision, but that was a very conscious, well thought out decision. Yes, we do.
Do you have issues with money she spends on her kids?
Sometimes I do. Again, it's part of being involved. Like, I remember this is one actually right when we got married. The boys were still playing baseball and, they wanted a brand new bat, which I don't know if you're a baseball mom, but those are like $300, right?
No.
And some new batting gloves.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a particular lack of long-term commitment from this particular child playing baseball. Ironically, he never played again. I don't know if he ever swung the bat, honestly. And that was something she was just doing, I think, in part because she wasn't used to having to check with somebody else.
Right.
So I gave her some grace on that. But, she makes good money. I make probably a couple times as much as she makes. And I don't say that because that means I think I have 2 times the say. I don't, not at all. Right.
It's reality.
But it's the reality. And the question I sometimes ask myself is, could she make this purchase without me? Mm-hmm. And the answer to that question is almost always yes. But I also don't necessarily think that that's always the right way to approach things. I mean, she can put her kids through college if she wanted to, all by herself, because she's planned for that. But it doesn't necessarily mean I agree, but maybe I don't get to say because that was something she's planned on since they were babies.
Right. It's easy to look at situations like that and say, she just bought all 3 kids a new pair of shoes. That's $400. You could ask yourself, well, could she pay for it by herself? Well, yeah, but that's not really the point. Like you said, that's probably not the best way to look at it. How about you look at it as if your kids were still young and your finances were together, that she wouldn't care that you bought your kids those things?
Yeah. Say that again.
You have to think that if your kids were young and the roles were reversed, say her kids were older and your kids were the younger, that if you bought something for your kids, that she would not have an issue with it at all.
Well, I mean, we have that a little bit at some level. So like when it comes to Christmas gifts or birthday gifts, I mean, my kids are still young enough that we're somewhat generous with birthday gifts and Christmas gifts still. And, a couple of my kids just graduated from college. So, college graduation gifts. And I would never in a million years consider buying any of those gifts without consulting her. In part because she has good ideas about what to get people.
Right.
And in other part because, this might be $75, $100, $150. Like I want her buy-in on that.
Okay.
So that's the model I work under. She hasn't been bad about that. She's been great about the purchases I want to make for my kids. But she doesn't have the same attitude that I have in terms of consulting me like I consult her.
Right.
And I think she sees it a little bit as maybe I don't trust her.
Right.
Whereas I don't consult with her because I don't trust me. I consult with her because it's our money.
Right. 100%. And so you need to talk to her about this. Not today. Don't jump on everything that we've talked about. You cannot do everything in one day or this woman will freak out on you. Okay.
Right.
So on your list of things that need to be addressed needs to be finances. And it's a simple discussion. It doesn't have to be emotional. It can be, hey, honey, our finances are together and we probably should have addressed certain things before we got married. Be more specific than when we got married. That anything over X dollar amount that we discuss with each other before purchasing.
That's easy.
Just as a touch base kind of thing, as a courtesy.
And we don't have a history of like vetoing stuff like that's stupid. I mean, I did mention one, the baseball bat thing that I thought was silly and I turned out to be right, but that's not the point. Being right usually will get you in trouble in a marriage.
Right.
Or at least pronouncing you're right. So I think that's reasonable. We don't have a history of arguing over, well, you spent more on your kid than my kid or whatever. So I think that actually might be a relatively easy thing to do that would show some progress that we can figure some of these tougher things out. Most of the conversations we have related to parenting is I think there's a severe lack of consequences. There are rarely consequences. I grew up in a consequence rich environment. We were just at her parents' house. That's a very consequence starved environment. I don't mean that in a negative term. They're just different.
Right.
Right. She is raising her boys exactly how she was raised.
Right.
Like contention is the worst possible thing that could happen in her household
Right.
from her family of origin.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's much better to tell somebody 17 times to go to get up on time or go do their homework than it is to take away their car for not having done what they were told to do.
Right. Yes. And so, like I was saying earlier, her upbringing has a lot to do with her parenting that could be construed as GPS. Not saying she doesn't have GPS.
Yeah.
What is your relationship like with your stepkids? I know it's got to be different with all of them.
Yeah, it is different. I mean, the oldest is headed off to college. So we've just by definition had less time.
Mm-hmm.
I met him as he was finishing up his freshman year in high school. We don't have a lot in common. Like the two youngers, we ski, just like it is with my boys. We ski a lot in the winter. So we have that thing in common. It's not as deep as I would like it to be with the oldest. The two youngers are, the middle one is fairly combative like I can be. And so we can be in an argument and then 2 minutes later giving high fives. So if I had had a brother, I'm sure that's what the relationship would have been like with my brother, but I only had sisters, which is probably more information that will confirm why I am the way I am.
Yeah.
But I think it's growing. You know what I've never heard, and I shouldn't take too much solace in this, but I've never heard what every book and podcast says is a dreadful thing to hear is I've never heard "you're not my dad."
Right. Well, that's good, but I think that might be because you tell mom how to parent rather than you parenting.
Yeah, I mean, but I do push that line. I do push that line, and they will generally do what I tell them to do because I will attach a consequence to it. And so maybe I'm revealing that I discipline a little bit more than maybe I let on to believe. But I'll say, hey, listen, you can't watch YouTube shorts until you get the lawn done. The lawn is like one of your few jobs, so
Right.
Go do it. Or what's more appropriate is I'm not taking you to the bike park until you have gotten the lawn done, because that's
Right.
something that's more focused on a boundary of mine. But they've generally received it well. They will, some of the things I judge, like when I'm out of town, I was out of town with my kids a few weeks ago off skiing in the Salt Lake area. And I got a text from the younger child, the mountain biker kid, who was like, "Oh, did you see this jump I took?" So to me, those are huge victories. Like I
Right.
read a lot, totally voluntary sharing of information to me shows that there is a relationship developing.
Yes.
That's way more important to me, or way more telling to me than they went and mowed the lawn under threat of not being able to watch YouTube.
Right. And when you have those moments, it's a reminder of this child is choosing to send this to me, not as a parent, but as a friend, as a mentor,
I know what you mean.
I'm glad you see it for what it is, because I know when David's kids message me, it means a lot to me.
And my wife feels the same way when my older kids, with whom she has a harder time developing a relationship because they're not around, right? When she gets a thank you or a, hey, my wife's into interior design, like my oldest daughter, hey, did you see this, whatever, on Instagram? Do you follow this person? Like, that's a huge win for her in an environment where she doesn't get a lot of opportunities to relate with her. So those are big wins, and I relish in those. And I think what I hear you saying is every parenting book will tell you in a bio family, like, you're not to be their friend. Your goal is not to be their best friend, it's to be their parent.
Right.
Like, stop trying to be your kid's best friend. And what I think I hear you saying is you need to tweak that for step parents. And as much as it might sound terrible, you actually really do need to be more their friend, because you're not their parent in the traditional role of parent that you're used to.
Right. We always say treat the stepkids at least with the common courtesy you would a friend's kid.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be there for them. You want to be their biggest cheerleader, their biggest confidant, their biggest mentor. And yeah, you could say friend, but friend to the point of being a positive relationship friend, I have to say.
Right.
But you can be all that to them, but you're not the parent. It doesn't matter if their bio father is deceased. You're not their parent. And so, like you said, all the books tell the parent, don't be their friend. Well, you're not the parent, so you can be their friend. David's kids tell me stuff they would never tell him. Never. Because I'm not their parent. There's not that judgment that a parent would have. There's not that disappointment that a parent would have.
Was it that way when they were in the house?
After I started nachoing, yes. Yes.
So you learned the hard way too?
Yes. Yes.
That's
very
the
hard
only way I learned.
And the thing is, this whole nacho process, a lot of people think it's just disengaging or stepping back. That is a big part of it because that's what takes the pressure off, right? So you stop telling your wife how to parent or how you think she's parenting wrong and stop saying stuff like that, things are going to get better because there's not that friction. But you haven't solved the issues. So the issues have to be solved. And a lot of the issues being solved is truly understanding the dynamics of a blended family, understanding what your role is in that blend that works best for everybody, looking at things from a different perspective, changing your thinking a lot. A lot of this nacho method is self-development.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
It is, and that's why it's not easy. And one of the hardest things for me was when I realized that I was probably the biggest part of the problem. Because everything worked fine before Lori jumped in, and I was like a monkey wrench in the plans. They didn't have to do their homework before they played, before Lori came. They didn't have to do this before Lori came. They didn't have to do that before Lori came. They could jump on the couch before Lori came.
It makes a lot of sense. This has been enlightening and really helpful. The good news, bad news is I have a lot of work to do.
Yes.
And the good news of that is there's a lot that I can control that will make this better.
Yes. And that controlling, I'm telling you, once you realize that you don't have control over anything and that you're fighting for this control and that the only control you have is yourself, that's the ultimate control.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you being a guest on our podcast. And I hope that what we've talked about will help you to at least be able to survive that 5-day period that your wife's gone.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate your help. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed my talk with Sean. And if you are struggling like Sean is, join the Nacho Kids Academy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the place you need to be if you want to learn how to nacho properly, lower your stress, improve the relationships. And look, if what you're trying is not working, you need to try something different.
All right, folks. That's it for today.
All right. Well, join us again next week. And until then, remember, life is good.
We and you, Nacho.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nacho Kids Podcast. Find us online at nachokids.com. Until next time, remember, life is good when you nacho.